For many people, when they think of self-care, they imagine wine and bubble baths. While those can be great ways to unwind, true self-care should go a step further.
And Daya Executive Director Rachna is here to share some ways we can truly take care of ourselves while in quarantine. It's a wonderful topic. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, self-care, I think, as we said in the intro here, kind of sounds like a spa treatment or something to pamper ourselves. And that is something that really needs a little bit more than that. It's a way to keep all of us in balance. And talk to us about why that's so important during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's this misconception that self-care is indulgent or that it's selfish, but actually it's quite the opposite. You know, if you are a caregiver, which so many of us are, whether it's being a parent or whether you're in a caregiving profession, you know, I work with so many social workers and counselors, case managers. It is critical that you take care of yourself in a really deliberate way before you can take care of others. So as you all know, there's that, you know, when you're on an airplane, they say, if the oxygen mask drops, put it on yourself before you put it on others. And that's really the best analogy for self-care. Until you're taking care of yourself, you can't really authentically give back to others. And so it's important that you're deliberately taking care of your physical health, your mental health, and your emotional health as well.
So, Rachna, Courtney and I were talking about how do we do this during quarantine? What is the best way for us to escape the dog, escape the kids, escape the phone? How do we do that while we're at home?
So I think the most important thing is that it is intentional and that it is all about you. So, you know, Courtney, you mentioned that you can't meditate, you can't do yoga, that your mind just races. And I totally get that. And so that shouldn't be your self-care, right? And you also talked about running. You all both mentioned how much you like working out. And that in of itself is self-care because you are taking care of your mind, your body, your emotions. It's all about doing the things that really feed you. So if you're in quarantine right now, and you seem to be missing the familiar, you know, folks who are missing going to church service or spending time with friends and family, there are ways that you can focus on that. You know, if you're not able to go to a large church service, you can perhaps light a candle, say a prayer with your family, with your spouse, you know, and of course there's FaceTime, there's texting. I know my friends and I do Netflix parties all the time. I'm FaceTiming with my nephews. So it's important that you don't try to recreate what you were doing to take care of yourself previously, and that you really just try to find new ways to do it. And then for people who are missing, who are getting bored, you know, I know there's tons of like Zoom fatigue and just really, really boring. You know, now's the time to really try something new. You could pick up a hobby. You can start journaling or writing, creating that bucket list, right? So there's lots of different ways to do self-care. I know myself as a pretty type A kind of person, I love making lists and like crossing stuff off a list. That feels really good to me. And so organizing the house or cleaning out a closet, although for some people that's a big chore, if that's self-care for you, lean into it is what I say. And so don't try to do something that's inauthentic. You got to do stuff that when you step back, you feel fed, you feel taken care of in your mind and your body and your soul.
Well, Rachna, let's talk about a real serious problem too. What's happening not only in our backyards, really around the country, around the world. Abuse rates during the pandemic, sadly, are up. Abuse is on the rise, whether we're talking about domestic, animal, alcohol abuse, you name it, it's on the rise. What are some places that people can go, or how do we get out of these types of abusive situations? Because right now, everyone is at home. There is no escaping.
Right.
Yeah, so Daya, along with all of our sister domestic violence agencies in the city, we have had our eye on this very, very carefully. Just like in times of natural disasters, you know, after Hurricane Harvey, we saw an increase in calls. And this is a little bit different because this is a natural disaster. This is a public health issue with COVID going on. But we are not necessarily seeing the same kind of access to being able to reach out for help. Many victims are stuck at home with abusive spouses. The stay-at-home orders, while they're incredibly important, you know, we've been in close contact with Judge Hidalgo's office. They're not meant to keep survivors in unsafe homes. That's not the purpose of these orders. So I want to remind anyone out there who might be at home with an abusive partner that your safety is the most important thing. And all of our agencies, Daya is one of them, along with others throughout the city who work with domestic violence survivors, we are all open and we are all adjusting and innovating the ways that we can meet the clients where they are. Shelters are open, we're providing hotel spaces. We do not think that being at home for COVID means that you need to stay in an abusive home. And so this is also a really important time to safety plan. And safety planning is about creating that plan and that process of how you're either going to stay safe in the situation that you're in or how you're going to plan to flee. And so we often hear people say, why doesn't she just leave? Well, unfortunately, when you flee domestic violence, that is when your risk for homicide rises drastically. And so it needs to be a well thought out, very intentional plan. And throughout that plan, we really try to put in moments of self-care. And that can look like speaking to your counselor. It can look like holding your children at night, saying a prayer, meditating, or going for a walk, right? But we want to make sure that as people are fighting literally for their lives and for their children's lives, that they're also taking care of themselves so that they can really show up for themselves and for their children.
And check in on your friends. Give them a call. You can always email them or text them. Isn't that right? Just checking in on them on a daily basis could be very helpful.
That's right. And that's true now more than ever. I mean, now is the time to really be attuned to whether relationships feel unhealthy or unsafe. And also, most importantly, the biggest red flag is if you feel like a friend or neighbor or family member seems to be more isolated than normal, that is a huge red flag. And it is a great idea to check in on folks in a safe way, right? So using text, calling them, FaceTiming them, all of those things. And now's the time to do it. And as neighbors and as a community, we have to take care of one another, not only through COVID, but in these other public health crises that show up during disasters like COVID.
Well said. Daya, Executive Director, Rachna, Khare, thanks so much for joining us today. Great information.
Thank you. If you missed any of Rachna's tips, don't worry. We are going to post an article on our website to get you started on that self-care.
Great information.